This is your number one radio station.
So, a very good afternoon and welcome to Star FM. This is 106.7 Nairobi, moving together. So, this is your beloved show, and today in our studio we have a guest. And our topic today is about domestic violence and how domestic violence affects students with their academic affairs or academic performance in schools. So, who do we have in our studios today?
So I go by name Anna Bureau. I come from Nyandarua County. I'm a first born in a family of five, coming from a very humble background, and I grew up in a home where there was a lot of conflict between my parents. There was constant arguments, constant yelling, constant beats up. There were times when my mom was forced to leave home out of nowhere, and that really embarrassed our state of living. So as a kid, it really suffocates life out of you. It becomes really stressful. You have to always be frightened because you do not know what you are awaiting next. You also get to a point where you get things like depression, you get anxieties because you're constantly worried.
So you said you have any siblings
Yeah, I have three brothers and a sister.
and a sister?
And being the firstborn, of course, you are overburdened with that. You have to paint a particular picture that you are always okay, even if you are not, because you have to cover this shame of what your parents do, even in front of the younger siblings, and that has overshadowed me as a young person.
So how has been your journey to the studio? It's summer cold, summer raining.
Well, it's been a little challenging because of transport, but we thank God we got safe. Yeah.
So to our listeners, this is Star FM 106.7. Remember to send your requests or your questions to our guest today via 22433. And before we get out of studio, we'll be reading your requests and your messages too. So as we get to our topic today, can you share your experience with this issue of domestic violence?
Um, Domestic violence, if I would begin to say it's something that has been permitted, it has been permitted by what we call toxic masculinity. Because as Africans, we grow knowing the father is the head of the family, and therefore what he commands has to be done. And therefore, the patriarchy in itself is what embraces domestic violence at home. And for a lot of women, it's so challenging for them to look for help because these men have connections with policemen. There is probably no justice. And it also affects the way as a girl you grow up knowing men. It affects how traumatic it affects the social life, and the social life of a person is encompassed with a lot of trauma. And yeah, that's the impact.
So during your introduction, you said that there was constant yelling and arguing, and sometimes it could have get some physical, where the parents could get into some eating and shoving. So as a kid, it was really stressful and frightening to witness that kind of violence between your parents on a regular basis. So in generally, that has been so difficult on you. So how do you feel witnessing domestic violence at home? And how did it affect you in school?
It affects your social life,
Mm-hmm.
especially with people of the opposite gender. Because even as a girl, you grow up knowing that boys are bad because you saw what your dad was doing. You grow up knowing that you are that only people from your gender, they are the ones who are wrong. It becomes what we call in today's generation and research childhood trauma. A lot of people bear a lot of that because what you pick from your childhood is what you embrace even as an adult. So it becomes very difficult to even believe in male teachers because you see a male teacher, you see the violence at home. So it has really had a negative ability. It has had a negative impact. Sorry, on my ability. If it's in school, the performance is really down because you're unable to focus, you're unable to perform well. You have constant anxiety because you're always worried. What if I go home and I find that my mom has been killed? What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to tell my younger siblings? It's really overwhelming. There is you get so much so distracted. It becomes impossible to even be attentive in class because of the anxiety that comes with it.
So the lack of stability at home carries over into struggling with grades, turning in assignments, and just overall low academic achievement. So did you find yourself having trouble concentrating in class or difficulty retaining information?
Yeah, that was primarily due to acquired anxiety, acquired depression. You cannot be attentive, and therefore your concentration is also interfered with, which means the way you catch up with things at school is different from how you catch up with things because your mind is constantly at home, what will happen at home. And especially if your mother is incapacitated financially, incapacitated mentally, because an abused woman does not have capacity to move out of that position. And therefore, what I would say is domestic violence is something that has a bigger impact. It has a bigger picture of impact of the kind of adult that you are compared to how people actually see it.
So did any of your family members help you overcome domestic violence?
Not really, because when you're a woman, when you're married, you are all alone. You're all alone because people from your side, your siblings cannot help you, especially if you're the firstborn from that side. People will be telling you you have to, mwanamke ni kuvumilia and such kind of stereotypical mindsets. And people from, of course, people from the paternal side will always support the man. And when you get to be abused, you lose a lot of friends in the process, and therefore we barely could look for help from relatives. We had to just stay there, see our mom get abused, and we couldn't do anything about it. So the only thing you do is you take the burden and you go to school, try to study, no matter how challenging it is, then you go back home and you try to cope with it. So it becomes a really huge dilemma.
So there is this issue of children rights, and generally the government has been fighting domestic violence, especially when it comes to children. Did you find yourself thinking of going to the authorities or reporting about the matter?
No, no,
Or
because you are constantly threatened. And as a child, you grow up with a lot of fear. Fear that if I speak against my dad, he's going to do something horrible to my mom. And the anxiety is always constant, it's constant, it's constant. You carry so much trauma that when you are an adult, it's difficult to cope. Because by the time you're an adult, the abuse has gone overboard and there is barely no evidence. There is barely an evidence for you to show of violence that has probably occurred before.
so are you alone in the society who has just faced domestic violence, or are there any of your friends who have faced the same?
Yeah, there are a couple of people, and especially the girl child, because it affects the social life, which means it also affects the way a girl perceives men out there, and it affects the kind of friendship she creates. It affects even the kind of home she will build because she will build her home on toxic feminism arising from toxic masculinity. So yes, I've met people around the world. It's my friends back at school telling me, my dad is also like this, my dad is also like that. At some point you feel lightweighted because you're not the only one suffering it. But it's also difficult when you are, especially a firstborn, and you have to carry the burden of your other siblings.
So overall, just recognizing that a child's academic struggles may be tied to deeper issues at home and providing support related to that. So those are really good points that I hope schools and educators will take into consideration. So thank you for opening up and sharing your experience with us today. So this is Star FM 106.7 Nairobi, and in our studios today we have been having a guest, and Mabiro. So thank you and see you next time.